if you start deputizing every teacher to basically be a psychologist when they're not a trained clinician, I think there's potential for corruption and weirdness there. I don't think that's a good idea.
An
Commit to
anti-racist.
struggle. Commit to struggle.
Oh.
Anytime you see struggle, that's Marxism.
Struggle session.
Yeah. Redefines and rebuilds all relationships and activities based on anti-racist commitments.
Holy what is this from?
What is good? Osiris here, stuck in the middle. I'm just going to play a video here of Attorney General Merrick Garland getting grilled about his son-in-law and conflict of interest. And then afterwards, I'm going to talk a little bit about this. Don't mind me. I'll just be sipping on some tea.
Mr. Attorney General, millions of Americans are deeply concerned today that instead of addressing the most pressing issues facing our country, we're watching the Biden-Garland Justice Department be weaponized, that you are using your authorities now to advance far-left policies and attack Republican-led state actions and erode constitutional norms. The most recent case in point has been brought up this morning. Your memorandum directing the FBI and other Department of Justice officials to get involved in local school board debates. It concerns us that it was issued just 5 days after the National School Board Association sent a letter to President Biden which referred to concerned parents as the equivalent of, quote, domestic terrorists and perpetrators of hate crimes, unquote. Given the timing of all this, your memo appears to have been motivated by politics more than any pressing federal law enforcement need. This is concerning to us, and it's worthy of investigation. It also concerns us that your actions may have been motivated by your family's financial stake in this issue. Published reports show that your son-in-law co-founded a company called Panorama Education. We now know that that company publishes and sells critical race theory and so-called anti-racism materials to schools across the country. And it works with school districts nationwide to obtain and analyze data on students, often without parental consent. On its website, the company brags that it's surveyed more than 13 million students in the U.S. It's raised $76 million from powerful investors, including people like Mark Zuckerberg, just since 2017. My first question is this: are you familiar with Title V of the Code of Federal Regulations, which addresses the rules of impartiality for executive branch employees and officials?
I am very familiar with it, and I want to be clear once again that there's nothing in this memorandum which has any effect on the kinds of curriculums that are taught or the ability of parents to complain about the kinds of...
I understand your position on the free speech of parents.
It is
wait just a minute. The question is, the thing that has concerned many of those parents that are showing up at these school board meetings, the very basis of their objection and their vigorous debate, as you mentioned earlier, is the curricula, the very curricula that your son-in-law is selling. So to millions of Americans, I mean, my constituents, I was home all weekend, I got an earful about this. They're very concerned about that. Subpart E of that federal regulation says an employee of the executive branch is discouraged from engaging in conduct that's likely to affect the financial interest of someone close to them. Your son-in-law, your daughter, clearly meets that definition. And so the question is, did you follow that regulation? Did you have the appropriate agency ethic official look into this? Did you seek guidance as the federal regulation requires?
This memorandum is aimed at violence and threats of violence.
Understand that, but did you seek ethics counsel before you issued a letter that directly relates to the financial interest of your family? Yes or no?
This memorandum does not relate to the financial interests of anyone. It's against...
I take that as a no. I take that as a no.
Memorandum is against violence and threats of violence.
Will you, Mr. Attorney General, will you commit to having the appropriate ethics designee review the case and make the results public?
This memorandum is aimed at violence and threats of violence.
I understand your talking point. You're not answering my question, Mr. Attorney General. With all due respect, will you submit to an ethics review of this matter, yes or no?
There's no company in America, or hopefully no law-abiding citizen in America, who believes that threats of violence should not be prevented. There are no conflicts of interest that anyone could have.
According to you, but sir, with due respect, that's the purpose of the federal regulation. We need objective third parties to review our activities. You don't get to make that decision yourself. It doesn't matter. You're the chief law enforcement of this country. This raises questions in the minds of millions of Americans, and your impartiality is being called into question. Why would you not submit to a simple ethics review of that?
I am exquisitely aware of the ethics requirements.
But you're not following them.
I have followed them and lived with them for the last 25 years.
Did you seek an ethics review of this or not?
I'm going to say again, there are no conflicts of interest involved when the Justice Department...
Okay. According to you, I got that. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but you are not respecting our rules, our constitutional norms, and the federal law that directly applies to your activities. This is a great concern. This is why people are losing faith in our institutions. They're losing faith in this Department of Justice. And you and I both know, as constitutional attorneys, that if the people lose their faith in our system of justice, if they lose their faith in the idea that justice is blind, that there are not two standards, that there's one standard of the law, and that everybody...
Time of the gentleman has expired. Would the Attorney General like to respond to the innuendo?
No, all I can say is I completely agree that the rule of law and respect for it is essential. And I will always do everything possible to uphold that and to avoid any kind of conflict of interest.
Boy, I saw his hair stuck in the middle. Wow. I am still conflicted with what happened with Merrick Garland, where Obama nominated him to this feckless man right here. This man right here. He was nominated to be a Supreme Court justice. I never have been for the tactics that Mitch McConnell did, but when it comes down to it, just like Democrats, and that was an establishment battle. That wasn't any populist thing there. Whatever you can do, you can get by. And McConnell held it up and it didn't go through. And you can argue, if you don't have the control of the Senate, you don't get to do it. But regardless of all that, objectively, aren't you praying to God right now, thankfully, that this man is not on the Supreme Court? His confirmation hearing, anytime he's questioned, he sounds he sounds like somebody who doesn't even have a spine. Like he can't even stand up on the merits of anything he does. If you're not familiar with what he talked about, Merrick Garland's son-in-law, Zan Tanner, co-founder, board member, and president since 2012 to 2020 of Panorama Education. Panorama Education sells surveys to school districts across the country that focus on the local social and emotion climate. This is this SEL type learning. This is new to me. These surveys are then used as justification, so you open the door for, wait for it, what some parents call critical race theory. This is from Forbes. I'm reading this from Forbes. I like how they did that. They said these surveys are then used as justification for new curriculum under providers that some parents call critical race theory. I think that's respectful. That's a respectful way. Forbes is pretty milquetoast. A respectful way to say parents are calling this critical race theory. Whether you want to call it that or not, that's what we're calling it. Great. And that is true. That parents of this, that call critical race theory and find it objectionable. Tanner's company has a large footprint. This is Merrick Garland's son-in-law. His daughter's husband has a large footprint with contracts in 50 plus of the nation's 100 largest school districts. The company describes its business as supporting 13 million students in 23,000 schools and 1,500 districts across 50 states. I'm going to end with this. What does this look like? Here's what the panoramic, in their own words, what the survey entails.
Hi there, I'm Sam from Panorama. Welcome to another episode of Research Minute. Today I'm excited to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in schools. These are big topics that educators care deeply about, but not always topics that they measure or measure well. In our work with thousands of schools across the country, we've seen districts track achievement gaps, discipline disproportionality, and bodies in the building diversity to understand how diverse and equitable their schools are. The first topic on the survey is diversity and inclusion. Students answer questions such as, at your school, how common is it for students to have close friends from different racial, ethnic, or cultural backgrounds? And how fairly do adults at your school treat people from different races, ethnicities, or cultures? The second topic is cultural awareness in action. Students answer questions such as, at your school, how often are you encouraged to think more deeply about race-related topics? And how often do students at your school have important conversations about race, even when they might be uncomfortable? Along with our existing sense of belonging scale, these topics give schools a new way to track progress of their equity initiatives, to empower student voice, and to signal the importance of diversity and inclusion to their community. Like all of our survey content, we're proud to offer the Panorama Equity and Inclusion Survey free of charge for all educators, and you can download it at the link on your screen. Thanks for watching.
I'm going to leave you out with a clip from DrKarlynB, who's one of the top people out there that I follow on Twitter, who knows about critical race theory and this SEL stuff, to let you know what this the SEL, social emotional learning, is what I think it's called. I keep messing up acronyms. The last video I should have just said NHTSA instead of association, but whatever, I digress. This SEL is different than CRT. It opens the door. How does CRT get into our schools? It's through, this is my interpretation, I'm still reading it, and she's the expert, so you can holler at her. To me, it looks like critical race theory gets into our schools through SEL. Let me know what you think. Take care.
So let's get into this, because I think, critical race theory is obviously the big hot button topic that has gotten a lot of national exposure over the past several months. But there is also all these other nefarious ideologies. And I think Deb made a really good point that I just want to make sure to emphasize. Like, these are all coming from the same place. They're all different legs off of the same, dozen-legged monster that is the public school system. So, what I've always thought is, like, as soon as critical race theory got too dicey, they were going to change the name to something else. Well, it's not even that they're just changing the name; it's that they're introducing new ways of teaching the same fundamental concepts. So we have things like equity, social justice, anti-racism, culturally responsive learning, socio-emotional learning. These, like, for the purpose of, like, everyday people, consider them all to be part of the same system. Like, they are not separate from one another. But I want to talk specifically about socio-emotional learning, because this stuff is terrifying. So who wants to give a good overview of what is SEL?
I think Deb knows more. Throw it her way.
Deb, take it away.
All right. So originally, and whether you agree with it, I happen to sort of disagree with it anyway, because I think parents should be parents and schools should be school. But the original idea was that the way we interact with each other, the way we think about ourselves and so forth is central to how we learn. And that for children to learn successfully in a school environment, they have to have a handle on things like emotional regulation, interpersonal communication, and intrapersonal communication. Intra meaning like with myself. How do I explain what's going on in the world to myself? All right. And for a while, the programs from a company called Castle, and I don't know if Panorama Ed was in existence, but Castle was like the big company. They had things that would give, lessons for teachers, trainings for teachers primarily. They would teach them how to engage with students and how to give them little tools to sort of calm themselves down and, solve disputes with each other. But and here's where my personal opinion comes in. Like, it sounds good, and especially because it didn't have any critical theory or collectivism attached to it. It was just about a little bit of psychology in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
If it's going to the school counselor, then it's good. I think it was like, if the school counselor is one learning this and taking the trainings and learning about children and how to help them navigate these waters, especially when they're coming from homes there might be trauma, I think could be good for school counselors to know that. Okay. If you start deputizing every teacher to basically be a psychologist when they're not a trained clinician, I think there's potential for corruption and weirdness there. I don't think that's a good idea. And I think it's about becoming an anti-racist organization. Yeah. And what you need to understand is that SEL is sometimes being presented as SEL, and sometimes it's being presented as making yourself into an anti-racist multicultural organization. Sometimes it's culturally responsive learning or teaching. But check this out. These are their therapeutic goals. Okay. So they've got symbolic change, a compliance organization. All right. Can you see?
Yeah, official policy pronouncements regarding diversity, make intentional effort at inclusiveness, still unaware of pattern of privilege and control. And then they go to identity change, an affirming organization, develops an analysis of systemic racism, increased commitment to dismantle racism and eliminate white advantage. Oh, isn't that an interesting term? White
Right.
advantage.
Exactly.
Institutional structures are like the mission of institutional structures, culture, maintain white power and privilege. And then we go to a transforming organization. And then I think we see
Commit to struggle. Commit to struggle.
Oh.
Anytime you see struggle, that's Marxism.
Struggle session.
Yeah. Redefines and rebuilds all relationships and activities based on anti-racist commitments.
Holy what is this from?
This is from it's a plan on, you know, changing and becoming equitable schools, whatever. But our North Carolina Department of Public Instruction is rolling this out, and our Department of Public Instruction is run by a Republican.
This is important because I've been getting a lot of emails from people saying, Garland, North Carolina banned this crap in their school.
No,
this is in North Carolina.